As a small Welsh man, I'm pretty used to not getting a lot of stuff that the United States of America gets. Air conditioning, WrestleMania, Bill Murray, and so on. But every so often, we and Japan see games the Eagle Gang never gets, and it's interesting how many PS1 games never officially came to the United States. Wow, that intro was pretty rapid, wasn't it? In Europe, it was known as Rapid Reload. In Japan, Gunner's Heaven. Cool name though, I quite like that one a lot. In America, well, it's in this video, so nothing. Which is weird because this early PlayStation run and gun should have been an easy win for Sony, but nah. SCEA had its infamous no 2D game stance in the mid-90s, meaning anything that didn't scream mind-boggling effects was dead on arrival. Or like, non-arrival? It's a shame for all you Freedom fans, because Rapid Reload had Gunstar Heroes energy out of the wazoo. Yes, it was clearly trying to ape Treasure's style, but PlayStation's library was starving for that kind of 2D action in 1995. Instead, American gamers got Criticom as a showcase of 3D power, while Europe quietly enjoyed this little gem. Rapid Reload hit during that awkward window where Sony's US marketing was pushing hard against old school aesthetics. A sprite-based shooter was seen as too niche, despite the fact that it was an absolute whipper. Critically, Rapid Reload landed some pretty solid reviews. Famitsu reported around 84,000 copies sold in Japan over its lifetime, which is not bad, but never sold huge figures in either territory. You know what, I never saw it in my youth, and it helps explain how even complete PAL copies fetch between $150 to $300 on the collector's market. Maybe Rapid Reload wasn't lost in the mainstream sense, but for fans of fast-paced arcade-style shooters, there weren't many games like this on PS1. Funniest of all, it's aged better than basically every other PS1 game from 1995. Not to panic, the next game is coming right up. Blend Time Crisis with Point Blank and Ghostbusters and you get Ghoul Panic. It features slapstick horror, tiny yellow cats and shooting ghosts with a ghost gun. Imagine Luigi if he had balls and just used his Glock instead of a Hoover. Developed by the same guys behind Bloody Raw, hell yeah Bloody Raw, and released in 2000 for PAL regions and Japan, this light gun shooter never found its way to North American shelves. So why? Well, a few reasons really. First, light gun games were already kinda niche by 2000 and the US was seeing declining interest in peripheral-based PS1 titles as the console's life dragged on. The PlayStation market was shifting towards RPGs, sports and more serious shooters like, Medal of Honor. Vampires slipping on banana peels isn't quite as hard-hitting as, infiltrating Nazi-occupied France. In Europe and Japan, however, it gained a bit of a cult following, but nothing like Namco's other shooters. PAL gamers could of course pick up Ghoul Panic bundled with a gun-con. I don't need it. Reviews were middling to decent, but let's be honest, light gun games are probably one of the most 10 out of 10 resistant genres out there. I stand corrected. Today, complete PAL copies are relatively affordable at like $30 for you lot, though gun cons are creeping up in price. It's a shame it didn't get a US release though. Ghoul Panic might not have been a blockbuster, but its slapstick charm could have given American PS1 owners a reason to dust off their light guns one last time before peak landed. Cons of being a bit weird, I guess. Now here's an oddity, a PS1 game that only released in Europe, and it isn't complete arsewater. It's actually quite good. Developed by Picture House, Terracon dropped in Europe in August 2000 and had players guiding the last of a genetically engineered alien race across sprawling planetary environments to stop a rogue AI. It's action, platforming and puzzling all mashed together with a unique Gen-Energy system that let you build structures and manipulate the landscape. Some are saying it was the first ever Fortnite type game. A North American release was actually planned with Midway lined up as publisher, but it never happened. By 2000, the PlayStation 2 was already out in Japan and imminent in the US. Publishers were scaling back on PS1 titles, especially ones without a guaranteed audience. Terracon's genre-bending gameplay and slightly oddball premise probably didn't help. It's a crazy cross-section of gaming history that this got compared to Halo by IGN at E3 2000, back when Halo was still third person. That's nuts. That's a bit of trivia for you. In Europe, the game was quietly well received. Reviews praise its ambitious design, generally quite impressive visuals for the PS1 and varied gameplay, even if the camera could sometimes work against you. It never set sales charts alight, but all 15 of its players at the time did enjoy it. These days, PAL copies of Terracon aren't overly expensive. If you want to play Proto Destroy All Humans, you could do far worse. Right, it's time to slop it up a bit. The Note is one of those PS1 horror games that's just kind of noteworthy because of how unserious it is. It's not meant to be. Developed by NK System and published by Team Bughouse, it landed in Japan in 1997 and later in PAL regions while published by Sunsoft. But North America never saw it. Eagle Gang, you are not missing out on an unseen Resident Evil rival here, but it is interesting and does get quite dark. The Note is a first-person survival horror adventure in which a paranormal journalist investigates strange disappearances in a European mansion. The premise has shades of Resident Evil and Alone in the Dark, but without the polish or budget of either. Controls are clunky, visuals are functional at best, and the voice acting is as wooden as Keanu Reeves playing Ed Wood if he was a lumberjack. As for why it didn't make it to America, well, Resident Evil had already set a pretty high bar for survival horror appears to reach, and the Note's knees did not exist. You get it? Because you need knees to reach stuff? Whatever. It's not hard to imagine why a US publisher didn't take the gamble here. PAL reviews were scarce, and the ones that exist were not good. The game has its fans, mostly for the atmosphere and oddball charm, but it's hardly a lost masterpiece. These days, the Note is a minor curiosity for collectors and YouTubers who want to talk about weird PS1 games. Hello. PAL copies are a bit steep if you want to buy it in America, but Japanese versions are a lot cheaper with full English voice acting as well, so there you go. Oh, what a banger of a game. Vib-Ribbon is one of the strangest, most brilliant oddities on the original PlayStation and just in gaming in general, really. While Europe and Japan got to mess about with this wiry little vector rabbit, America was left in the dark. The reason? According to ex-SCEA President Sean Layden, when talking about a much later port, SCEA didn't care for Vib-Ribbon. They said, no market for it, we're not going to localize it. Boom, that was it. That's particularly ironic given how forward-thinking the actual game was. You see, you could drop in any music CD and Vib-Ribbon would generate levels based on the audio. It was an idea a decade ahead of its time, long before procedurally generated rhythm games became a thing. But in the US, Sony didn't want to spend money localizing, basically, a coat hanger. In terms of reception, Vib-Ribbon garnered solid praise. On the sales side, it launched in Japan in December 1999 and Europe in August 2000, moving around 100,000 copies in its first week in Japan. You could see that very easily getting pumped up by an American release as well, though. Americans did actually get their hands on it, but only in 2014 when Sony sheepishly released it digitally for PS3 and PSP. Funnily enough, Sean Layden mentioned the game at an E3, unaware it never came to America, and so after some fan momentum, Sony eventually relented and brought the game out on the PlayStation Store. But the magic of booting up your Crazy Town CD just obviously wasn't there like it used to be. Give this a PS5 port anyway, why not? And PS6, just do it. Hell, put it in the cloud and then put the cloud in my skull, Sony, you frauds. Not an adaptation of the first time you went to a school disco, Hellnight is instead one of the PS1's more unusual horror games. Released by Atlus in Japan in 1998 and PAL regions in 2001 by Konami, interestingly, it's a first-person survival horror game with a heavy emphasis on running and hiding. You see, there's no combat here. You're relentlessly pursued through an underground labyrinth by a shape-shifting biological weapon, and your only real goal is survival, and also to make some mates. A North American release was never on the cards apparently, which isn't surprising. Hellnight's minimalist design and slower pace would have been a hard sell in a US market dominated by Resident Evil and Silent Hill. Add in Atlus's relatively small presence in the West at the time, and it's clear why this one stayed overseas. Despite that, Hellnight has built a modest cult following over the years. Its claustrophobic atmosphere, oppressive sound design, and the constant tension of being hunted without a means to fight back is pretty impressive for the PlayStation. It was ahead of its time in some respects, anticipating the no weapons horror trend later seen in Amnesia and Outlast, and then later done to death by about 90% of the horror on Steam. Boring. That said, it's far from perfect. The environments can feel repetitive, character animations are a bit stiff, and the story isn't as fleshed out as it maybe could have been. But for those who appreciate atmospheric, experimental horror, Hellnight has a certain rough-edged charm. Today it is a sought after collector's item. In America, PAL copies often sell for like 250 bones complete. That's a lot. Why don't you break from the shackles of retro collecting prices and do a couple of online searches instead? Chaos Break is one of those PS1 games that feels like a mashup of big survival horror hits that never quite got the ingredients right, or the potatoes were out of date. Mashup potatoes? Yeah. Developed by Taito maybe, whatever. It arrived in Japan and PAL regions in 2000 as a spiritual successor to the arcade shooter Chaos Heat. The US release was never pursued, and honestly, it's not hard to see why. The game plays like a lighter, action-oriented Resident Evil with a touch of Dino Crisis and a lot of dodge rolling. You're exploring an abandoned bio-research facility, and you know what? It's totally fine. Nice day out. Now it's infested with alien slime monstrosities after a containment breach. The third-person tank controls are familiar, as is the combination of combat corridors and puzzles. But Chaos Break just isn't very scary, as you have hundreds of bullets to use and can just feel like a pain in the ass to play. Enemies are more annoying than terrifying, and the story leans into B-movie territory, but it feels like it's trying too hard to be cheesy. But hey, it can be fun in a dumb way. Why skip the US though? Well, as mentioned, by 2000 the PlayStation survival horror niche was crowded. Put this and Resident Evil 3 side by side and there's only one clear winner. Chaos Break was never going to break any sales records. Still, it's gained a small cult following among collectors and horror enthusiasts, and PAL copies are like $200 in the US. There is no need to spill blood to play this one, Eagle Gang. Oh man, I should honestly be getting some kind of commission for how often I've mentioned the Overblood verse lately. If the original Overblood was a strange but earnest survival horror, its sequel cranked up the scale and the ambition, and also the not being very good lever. Released in Japan in 1998 and Europe a year later, Overblood 2 swapped claustrophobic corridors for a sprawling sci-fi cityscape, multiple playable characters, and a story about corporate conspiracies and environmental collapse. It was bigger, bolder, more Final Fantasy VII-ier, and unfortunately, a lot more broken. The gameplay shifted towards action-adventure with large open areas and vehicle sections that were impressive on the PS1 but undermined by sluggish controls and a notoriously temperamental camera. The cutscenes, often unskippable, didn't help either. All told, it felt more like a very ropey attempt to copy Final Fantasy VII, but with all the charm of a Channel 4 interviewer when you just want to talk about your silly superhero movie. So why was America deprived of this weird, lovely mess? Well, the first Overblood had actually made it across the pond, and it was a cult hit at best. Electronic Arts published that one in the West, but considering that Evolution Entertainment published the sequel in the West and did such a poor job that the game had to be repressed with a new publisher, the best in the business weren't exactly chasing down Overblood 2, were they? Despite its flaws, Overblood 2 has earned a small, very small cult following for its ambition and weirdness. Its director, Akihiro Hino, would earn a much larger following for his work on the underground hit Dragon Quest VIII. Now that's wild. This one is a bit of an oddity, right? Especially because I think I've seen roughly 100,000 copies of this out in the wild in my lifetime. Right, so Mickey's Wild Adventure is the PS1 port of Mickey Mania, a 1994 platformer that originally released on the Genesis/Mega Drive, SNES and Sega CD. It's not a sequel or a radically new game, it's just a remaster with enhanced visuals, redone music and some tightened up mechanics. And yet, bizarrely, this souped up version never made it to Japan or North America. Why? Well, the original Mickey Mania did hit the US, so there was no licensing issue there. More likely, Sony and Traveller's Tales, yes, that Traveller's Tales, didn't see enough demand to justify releasing a 2-year-old enhanced port in a market where the PS1 already had a glut of platformers. Oh yeah, Sony first party published a game based on King Disney. What a weird timeline. By the time Mickey's Wild Adventure dropped in Europe and Japan, American players were moving on to kind of flashier fare like Crash Bandicoot and Rayman. Rayman, sorry. That's not to say this version didn't deserve a look. The PS1 upgrade gave it cleaner sprites, smoother animations, and a fully orchestrated soundtrack that really upped the Disney magic. It still had the same level structure of guiding Mickey through stages inspired by his animated history, and for fans of the original, it was arguably the definitive edition. For Mickey kids or platformer fans, it's worth a spin. Its price is not muy grande either. Oh yeah, it's football time. I'm going to give this everything I've got. Please don't go Americans. Landon Donovan, Tim Howard, Clint Dempsey, others. For the 9 of you still here, hello, how you doing? Let's talk about LiberoGrande. Released in Japanese arcades and later ported to PS1 for Japan and Europe, it was Namco's kind of bonkers attempt at a player-focused football sim. You see, instead of controlling an entire team, you pick a single player and stick with them for the full 90 minutes, positioning yourself, calling for passes, and trying to carry the match on your virtual shoulders. It's pretty neat. I remember playing the demo of this to death and being awful at it, but why no US release? Well, 2 words, market disinterest. 1997 was hardly a peak year for football in America. Also, LiberoGrande does sound like a kind of coffee. At the time, football games were hardly top sellers in North America, and LiberoGrande's unusual design probably didn't help sell it. FIFA and ISS were, ISS, what a banger, were already dominating European charts, so bringing over a niche football sim where you're limited to one player likely felt like a hard sell to Namco or Sony in America. It is a shame though, because the concept was ahead of its time. Modern stuff like Be a Pro in FIFA owes a lot to what LiberoGrande tried on the PS1. Shame about the rest of the nonsense surrounding FIFA though. How was it received? Well, reviews were kind of mixed back then. They praised the novelty but criticised the AI and limited tactical options. Still, for football purists or collectors of oddball sports titles, it is kinda neat. Ahead of the World Cup in 2026, which Wales will absolutely win, why not get a bit weird with a football game on the OG PlayStation? Right, it's a video about skipping, so let's skip the outro. Catch you in the next one.